Over the course of the last decade, Final Fantasy XIV has had one of the biggest comebacks in gaming history. Rising from the ashes of the disastrous 1.0 release, it's become one of the most popular MMOs on the market, even briefly surpassing the king of the genre, World of Warcraft. Now, I've been playing Final Fantasy XIV for a good few years myself, and in the thousands of hours I've racked up, whether I'm grinding for relic weapons, leveling all the jobs, going on a hunt train across the moon, or simply just playing mini-games in the Gold Saucer, one thing I've never done is gone back to revisit the story. So with Dawntrail a few weeks out, I thought now would be as good a time as any to go back and revisit this incredible story. So let's go over what we'll be covering in this video. This will be the first part in a series looking back at the current storyline of Final Fantasy XIV and its 4 expansions. Now, I won't be covering the 1.0 release as I can't really play something that no longer exists, but I will be covering everything from A Realm Reborn right the way up through Endwalker. I aim to put these videos out on a weekly basis until we're all caught up with the current patch content, and then I'll likely put something together for Dawntrail after I've had time to sink my teeth into it. Consider subscribing for more Final Fantasy XIV and retrospective content in the near future, and without further ado, let's take a look back at Final Fantasy XIV, A Realm Reborn. We'll start with a quick recap of the CGI trailer depicting the closing events of the 1.0 storyline, an event known as the 7th Umbral Calamity, or simply the Calamity. We'll go into more detail about these events later on, but what you need to know for now is the armies of the Eorzean Alliance and the Garlean Empire are locked in battle as the lesser moon Dalamud falls from the sky. This is the Battle of Carteneau, named for the region housing ruins belonging to the ancient Allagans, a technologically advanced empire that was wiped out during the 4th Umbral Calamity several thousand years prior. Dalamud was no moon, however. It was a satellite created by the Allagans as a prison to house the Elder Primal Bahamut, in an attempt to use him to channel energy from the sun, resulting in the collapse of their great crystal tower, setting off a chain of earthquakes and wiping out the entire Allagan Empire. About to crash into the land, Dalamud breaks open, setting Bahamut loose, wreaking incredible destruction in his wake. The Archon Louisoix Leveilleur and a group of his finest students, the Circle of Knowing, begin prayers to the 12, the Eorzean Pantheon, in an attempt to imprison the Great Dragon, which ends up failing. Louisoix's final act is to send a group of adventurers, representing the players who were around during 1.0, into a rift, bringing them to safety. 5 years have passed since the Calamity, and it's here where our story begins. After character creation, we go through a short dream sequence in which our character confronts a masked mage, conjuring a weapon made of light to defeat him, while being called out to by the Mother Crystal, Hydaelyn. Now, your whole relationship with Hydaelyn and what she is rather complicated, but all you need to know for now is she's basically the centre of the life stream, a current of ether that flows through all living things in the planet, which is also rather confusingly called Hydaelyn. And the ether is the sort of life force of every living thing, and can be channelled into spells and the like. The closest comparison I can give is the Force from Star Wars, but that would probably be oversimplifying it. So we wake up from our dream, and depending on which starting class you choose, you'll be arriving at either Gridania, the tranquil forest city-state located in a region known as the Black Shroud, Limsa Lominsa, a maritime city-state in La Noscea, a coastal region on the southwestern island of Vilbrand, or Ul'dah, a bustling commercial hub in the southern desert region of Thanalan. Regardless of your starting area, the opening 5 hours or so play out largely similarly. We check in at the local Adventurers Guild, explore our starting city, then it's off to do some typical MMO fetch and kill quests, before running into members of the secret society known as the Scions of the Seventh Dawn. The duo of Ida and Papalymo await us if we started in Gridania, Y'shtola joins us if we chose Limsa Lominsa, and we meet Thancred starting in Ul'dah. Upon meeting our new allies, we also get into our first solo duty, a type of instance battle that crops up from time to time throughout the main scenario, as well as your class quests and a few other questlines. These monsters go down quickly as one might expect, leaving behind a crystal, which, upon collecting, causes us to pass out for another dream sequence. Hydaelyn calls out to us once more and tasks us with collecting the 6 crystals of light in order to banish the coming darkness. Now, if you're a long-time Final Fantasy fan like I am, this is where you'll be rolling your eyes. It's always a journey to collect the treasures of the elements. This is as by-the-numbers Final Fantasy as you can get. It's not bad by any stretch. It's a classic setup that gives you as good a reason as any to go out and explore the world. You'll find that there's a lot of references and callbacks to past games as we go, ranging from new arrangements of classic music, numerous iconic locations and characters, and my personal favourite feature in any RPG, the job system. First introduced to the series in Final Fantasy III, the job system allows us to swap between any class or job once we've learned them. I can't tell you how happy this makes me. I've always loved this system, especially in Final Fantasy V, where you can mix and match abilities from various jobs to suit your playstyle, adding endless depth and replay value. 14's version is just a basic class swap system, with only a handful of overlapping abilities based on your role, but it's still fantastic that you can use any combat, crafting or gathering job without ever having to make another character. Now that we know our main objective, it's off to do a few more basic quests before running into a masked mage, similar to the one from our dream. This is an Ascian, a member of a mysterious group stirring up trouble behind the scenes, and one of our major antagonists. We wiped the floor with him and his pet Voidsent, a demonic creature summoned from another realm, and I hailed the champion of our respective starting city. We're quickly introduced to the city's leaders: Khan Ys-Sena, the elder Seed Seer and head of the Order of the Twin Adder in Gridania; Admiral Merlwyb Blafiswin, nailed it, a former pirate and leader of the Maelstrom in Limsa; and Sultana Nanamo ul Namo, alongside General Rauban al-Din, leader of the Immortal Flames in Uldar. We're then tasked with visiting the other city-states to help organise remembrance ceremonies for those lost at the Battle of Carteneau 5 years ago, and upon boarding an airship, our 3 starting paths converge. This is a great introduction to the world. We're given a few simple tasks to get us used to how everything works before moving on to our first pieces of group content. One complaint I'd really like to get out of the way, however, is the voice acting. It's not very good. It's infrequent, making a lot of cutscenes about reading rather than watching. The frequency does improve across expansions, but it's far from ideal during ARR. Now I understand that not everything can be voiced, and with the sheer amount of dialogue in 14, I'm not surprised. But other RPGs with partial voice acting tend to front-load their stories with a large amount of fully voiced cutscenes, before falling back on partially voiced or silent scenes. With 14, the opening dream sequence is voiced, then it's back to silence and reading, then there's about 4 or 5 other cutscenes that get the voice treatment up to this point. What exacerbates this issue is that the majority of the voice acting ranges from serviceable,
"Forgive my selfish desire to assure your welfare,"
to outright bad.
Hello there.
Welcome!
I don't think it's the fault of the voice actors themselves though, but rather it feels like poor voice direction, with a lot of lines lacking the proper cadence, feeling like the actors are reading words on a page rather than acting out a scene. Now this is just a problem with the English voice cast in A Realm Reborn, who all up getting replaced in the game's first expansion, Heavensward, after which the storytelling dramatically improves, leading Final Fantasy XIV to become one of the best stories in the series in my opinion. I just think the first impression a lot of new players get might put them off before they've had a chance to properly get into the game. I'm not sure if there's a chance this will ever be changed, but A Realm Reborn did receive a pretty big rework a few years ago, shortening some of the quest lines and streamlining some of the dungeons, so I guess never say never. Alright, complaints aside, let's continue on. It's time for the introduction of the 14th Legion of the Garlean Empire. These guys are the primary antagonists of A Realm Reborn, with the 4 major players being Ritatin Sas Arvina, an absolute unit of a Roegadyn man wielding a gigantic pair of gun shields, Nero Tolskeva, a gifted engineer, Livia Sas Junius, a decorated soldier and battlefield commander, and their leader, Legatus of the 14th Imperial Legion, the Black Wolf, Gaius van Baelsar. Gaius laments about a failed invasion from 15 years ago, in which the dreadworm Midgardsormr attacked the Imperial flagship, the Agrius, causing both to crash into the ocean, halting the Imperial's advance and killing Midgardsormr in the process. We're then properly introduced to Nero, as he kills a spy that managed to infiltrate their ranks. This is a great introduction, but unfortunately outside of Gaius and Nero, we don't really get to learn much about the 14th Legion. In fact, I'm pretty sure Ritatin just exists to be this big beefy dude for us to beat up later on. It's a shame because these guys could have been quite memorable, especially with their distinct and quite frankly badass Final Fantasy XII inspired armour. Instead, they're little more than stereotypes acting as roadblocks on our journey. At any rate, it's time to tackle our first set of group content. A back-to-back set of 3 dungeons, as we're given requests from the 3 city-states adventurers guilds to investigate suspicious activity. First up is Sastasha, a series of caves in La Noscea where a group of pirates, seemingly allied with the Sahagin, a tribe of fish-like beastmen, have taken up residence. Second, it's off to the Tamtara Deepcroft, an underground burial site situated in the Black Shroud, to flush out a group of cultists. And finally, Thanalan's Copperbell Mines, to take care of a group of giants who were once imprisoned underground there. Now you can tackle these with a group of friends, queuing to find other players via the Duty Finder, or you can play solo with a party of NPCs thanks to the Duty Support system. What this means is the majority of Final Fantasy XIV can be played entirely on your own if you desire, with the only exceptions being 8-man trials and the slew of optional dungeons and raids. The AI isn't the best, always prioritizing single targets over using AoE abilities, but it creates a nice low-pressure environment for new or less confident players. Let's have a quick rundown on group content. Final Fantasy XIV uses a traditional Holy Trinity system, with tanks commanding the attention of enemies, DPS players hitting everything as hard as they can, and healers trying to keep everyone alive. DPS jobs are split into melee, focusing on close quarters combat and position-based attacks, and two flavours of ranged. Physical, featuring high mobility mixed with some supportive abilities, and magical, who tend to stand on one spot casting slow but hard-hitting spells. Healers also come in two flavours. You've got your traditional pure healers, who focus on restoring lost health, and barrier healers, who focus more on mitigating incoming damage. The standard party makeup for a dungeon is 1 tank, 1 healer, and 2 DPS, with 8-man trials and raids doubling those numbers, and the larger alliance raids featuring 3 parties with 1 tank, 2 healers, and 5 DPS, for a total of 3 tanks, 6 healers, and 15 DPS. Combat features a pretty typical MMO-style tab targeting system, with your various abilities spread out over multiple hotbars. Standard attacks can be strung into combos and use a global cooldown, or GCD, which prevents other attacks from being used for initially 2.5 seconds. This is pretty slow to begin with, but the GCD can be reduced by a fair amount as you level up and find better gear. You also have access to several off-GCD abilities, such as powerful attacks, buffs, or heals with separate cooldowns that you can weave between your standard attacks. Early on, you won't have access to many abilities, with the first 3 dungeons not even giving melee and tank jobs their first standard combos yet. This is a blessing and a curse, because while it can be easier for beginners, it leads a lot of the early dungeons to having pretty uninteresting boss encounters. Most are a simple case of hit it till it dies and avoid the occasional obviously telegraphed AoE attack. Another problem is virtually every dungeon after A Realm Reborn is basically a linear hallway, with a few groups of enemies between each of the 3 bosses, and it's always 3 bosses. There's some great looking hallways with some nice music to boot, but at the end of the day, they're still hallways. Now the boss fights do ramp up in difficulty and complexity at a nice pace after ARR, but the overall dungeon design is a little too formulaic, and I know most of the community feels the same way. Upon our return from these 3 dungeons, we learn that word of our deeds has spread, and we're about to be formally invited to join the Scions of the Seventh Dawn. The Scions of the Seventh Dawn are a secret society formed after the Calamity by a group hailing from the northwestern city-state of Sharlayan called the Archons, whose goals are to protect the people of Eorzea by fighting the Garlean Empire and fending off the Primals, godlike beings worshipped and summoned by the realm's various beast tribes. Its members are Ida Hext and Papalymo Totolimo. Hailing from the eastern city-state of Ala Mhigo, Ida was forced to flee her home along with her sister Lys during the Garlean invasion. Longing to return home and liberate it from the Empire, Ida joins forces with the Sharlayan native Papalymo, where the duo helped to smuggle Ala Mhigans to the safer lands of Eorzea, before both joined up with the Scions. Thancred Waters. Once a petty thief from Limsa Lominsa, the young man was taken in by Louis Soir after one day trying, and failing, to rob him. Putting his natural talents to better use, Thancred studied survival and intelligence gathering techniques before joining the Circle of Knowing and later the Scions. Y'shtola Hrul. Incredibly gifted in the arcane arts, and she knows it, the young Sharlayan studied under the Archon Matoya, following a particularly strict regimen initially designed for the Archon to be rid of her. Stubbornly working through it, the pair bonded, and Y'shtola spent a decade as Matoya's student, before joining the Circle of Knowing and founding the Scions. Urianger, sage and scholar of prophetic teachings, was the first to draw the attention of Eorzeans to the dangers of the Seventh Umbral Calamity. Presiding over the Scions' headquarters at the Waking Sands, seeing him buried in some sort of ancient tome is a common sight, reflected by his poetic style of speech. Tataru Taru. Born into a wealthy family who ultimately lost it all, Tataru took an apprenticeship at a jeweller's, which led her to meeting the leader of the Scions herself. A talented artisan and budding songstress, Tataru serves as the Scions' coin keeper. Finally, the leader of the Scions, Minfilia Ward. Gifted with a miraculous power known as the Echo, the Ala Mhigan native was born under the name Asilia. Orphaned at a young age when her father was trampled to death by a raging Gubu set loose in Uldar, Minfilia was taken in by one of the group responsible for the incident, the songstress of Uldar, Flamine. Minfilia spent her early adult life seeking out others who shared her gift, founding the Path of the 12, a group dedicated to understanding the Echo and trying to learn how best to use it for the good of the realm. With her adoptive mother presumed dead to the Calamity, Minfilia's Path of the 12 joined the remnants of the Circle of Knowing to found the Scions of the Seventh Dawn. With introductions out of the way, Minfilia informs us that we are blessed by Hydaelyn and possess the same gift as her, the Echo. To put it simply, the Echo allows us to see into someone else's mind and witness their past. However, we can't control when it happens. This is basically the game's way of showing you contextual flashbacks whenever the need arises. In terms of gameplay, it increases your strength when your party wipes during most group content, and allows you access to limit breaks, the series' signature ultimate abilities, letting you dish out massive damage, heal your whole group, or provide them with a massive defensive bonus, depending on your role. We're now tasked with investigating primal activity, which leads us to our first series of trials against Ifrit, Titan, and Garuda. Trials are easily my favourite piece of group content in any MMO. Sometimes you just want to gather a party and take down a big boss monster. To me, that's the best part about most RPGs, a memorable fight with a banger of a boss theme to really get your blood pumping. 14 provides dozens of these, and while a couple unfortunately do miss the mark, most are undeniably epic. There's even a lore reason for the game letting us fight these classic Final Fantasy summons over and over. You see, primals are immortal beings that exist within the lifestream, and are only granted corporeal form by the prayers of their followers and an abundance of ether, which is often in this concentrated, crystallized form. So the beast tribes gather these crystals, begin their prayers, and the primal is summoned. So even if we defeat the primal, there's always this threat of them coming back later down the line. Up first is Ifrit, worshipped by the beast tribe known as the Amolja. After botching an ambush attempt on a group of thieves, we're captured and brought before the Lord of the Inferno, who tries to put us under his spell. This process is known as tempering, and once you're tempered, you're enthralled to the primal until the day you die. There's no known way to reverse tempering, but conveniently for us, the Echo renders us immune to primal influence. This sends Ifrit into a rage, and it's up to us to take him down. For our first trial, it's a relatively simple fight where we're getting blasted by Ifrit's classic signature moves, Hellfire and Radiant Plume. Titan, worshipped by the kobolds, is up next, and this is a much more interesting encounter. It's this 5-stage marathon of a fight, where Titan slams into the ground, shrinking the arena, sending off shockwaves, causing explosions, and even trapping party members inside boulders. This is the first fight that really had me clamouring for more, and 14 is happy to provide. Third is Garuda, worshipped by the Ixal tribe, who totally has the best boss theme, and blasts us with wind, creating vortexes and throwing us around. I will say this is a lot less satisfying a fight than Titan, but the harder difficulty versions add this pair of sort of clones that you have to drag away from her to stop them buffing her, making for a much more interesting encounter. For the story, we just get a few attacks where we have to hide behind rocks and get out of the way of some AoEs. So the structure leading up to these encounters is where one of ARR's biggest flaws lies: pacing. You start with a slow build-up leading into a super satisfying payoff with the trial, and then it's straight back to another slower build-up for the next one. I know it can't all be this mile-a-minute roller coaster of an experience, but the last thing you want when you're riding the high of taking down an epic boss is to be dragged back down into boring fetch quests. This is an MMO after all, and unfortunately its storytelling can't escape the typical trappings of the genre. While it's great to experience the highs and the lows, and spend time getting to know all of the interesting and varied characters, ARR in particular doesn't handle its pacing very well at all. There's very little in terms of meaningful interactions or character development, and you're often shoved off to meet the next set of minor NPCs whose names you're likely to forget as soon as you've moved on to the next big plot point. Again, this isn't ARR problems, the expansions vastly improve the storytelling across the board. Okay, let's back up a bit. After we take Ifrit down, claiming our second crystal, we head off to check out these remembrance ceremonies we helped set up earlier. These serve to introduce us to Alphinaud and Alycée Leveilleur, the grandchildren of Louisoix. The twins are presented as young wandering academics, with Alphinaud being this arrogant little prick who thinks it's up to him and the Scions, backed by the Grand Companies, to save the realm, while Alycée, the more hot-tempered twin, chooses not to rely on the Grand Companies and shortly leaves in search of other ways to, in her words, cure what ails this world. We don't actually get to see Alycée again in the MSQ until Heavensward, though we'll learn plenty about both twins and their grandfather during the Coils of Bahamut questline later. We're then tasked with choosing which of the 3 Grand Companies to join: Gridania's Order of the Twin Adder, Limsa's Maelstrom, or Uldar's Immortal Flames. There's no real difference between these outside of a few cosmetics, but this is where you get access to your first mount, a chocobo of course, as well as eventually the ability to command your own squadron of adventurers to take them through dungeons and send them on special missions. It's a neat system and offers a handful of nice rewards, but support for it was dropped after Heavensward, so they're little more than very basic daily and weekly quests. Now, I originally started with the Order of the Twin Adder, but as I'm working on the Maelstrom achievements right now, I picked them for our trip through the story. As I said, it barely makes a difference, only really affecting where I'll be reporting to for a couple of quests. Just as we're signing up, our soon-to-be commander receives an urgent report. An airship carrying a pair of engineers has been forced to make an emergency landing after being fired on by the Garlean Empire. With no one else available to check it out, our first duty under the Maelstrom is to rescue series recurring characters Biggs and Wedge. They've got some great chemistry and are far more than the Star Wars reference the series has kept up since Final Fantasy VI. We'll get back to these two in a little bit though. It's off to meet the Sylphs next. They're one of the more peaceful beast tribes, worshipping the primal Ramu. They're of no real threat at the moment, but their elder's gone missing and needs rescuing from what will become our 4th dungeon, the Thousand Moors of Toto Rak. A pretty straightforward run through an abandoned underground jail, culminating with us being introduced to the red-masked Ascian, La Habrea. He gives us some cryptic speech telling us that the only thing standing in the way of the world becoming enshrouded in darkness is our blessing, the Echo. And instead of taking us out right then and there, he sends a giant scorpion after us. Alright then. So we rescue the Elder, get our 3rd crystal, and it's off to investigate some murders, taking us to dungeon number 5, Hawk Manor. Okay, so this is one of those things where I'm not sure about the official pronunciation, so apologies if any of this sounds different to what you're used to. Anyway, this dungeon's pretty neat. It's your typical haunted mansion and has you collecting a bunch of keys to unlock passages to the different bosses. Bit of an old school Resident Evil vibe here, only much more simplified. At the end, we run into a pair of Ascians working under La Habrea who exist purely to taunt us and leave, and then it's off to slay Titan. The run up to Titan is a bit of a slog. The kobolds are hiding out in a vast network of mines, and we need a way in. So we meet a member of the Company of Heroes, a band of adventurers who were said to have defeated Titan many years ago. They basically send us on a bunch of fetch quests so we can have a banquet before telling us how to get in, including a trip through another dungeon, Brayflox's Longstop, where we have to escort a friendly goblin through the wilderness to get a block of cheese. I'm being deadly serious here. I'd call it padding if it wasn't so utterly ridiculous of a premise. So we get this banquet set up, we eat our share, and the Company of Heroes reveal the way in, a special aetheryte outside the mines. Much like the aetherytes we use as fast travel points, a normal person wouldn't be able to use it to get into the mines without attuning to the one that's already down there. But thankfully we have Y'shtola to help us navigate the lifestream and arrive in one piece. After laying the smackdown on Titan for our 4th crystal, we learn that the Garleans are in league with the Ascians, studying the primals for use in something they claim to be significantly more powerful. So with that hovering around in the back of our minds, it's back to the Waking Sands once more, only to find out that it's been attacked, and everyone, with the exception of Minfilia, Totaro, Urianger and Papalymo, has been killed. We're shown a flashback of the attack, where Livia leads a unit of Imperials and slaughters everyone in brutal fashion. This is one of those big oh shit moments, because you get so used to coming back here after every questline that it comes completely out of nowhere. Taking refuge in a nearby church, we meet Cid Garlond, a master engineer who defected from Garlemald during the events leading up to the Calamity. Traumatised by the events he witnessed at Carteneau, Cid has completely lost his memory. It's here that Alphinaud turns up asking for help rebuilding the Scions of the Seventh Dawn. That and we could really do with an airship to get to Garuda, and Cid just happens to own one. It's just a question of finding it. This is where we finally get to visit some new environment, starting with a trip to the snowy highlands of Kurthus, home of Ishgard, a neutral and heavily religious city-state locked in constant battle with an army of dragons known as the Dravanian Horde. Struggling to find anyone actually willing to help us find Cid's airship, we meet Lord Haurchefant of House Fortemps. Haurchefant is incredibly polite, friendly, and more than happy to charge into battle with us, which he soon does as we unravel a conspiracy in Kurthus. The Temple Knights of Ishgard have been infiltrated by Dravanian heretics, and it turns out that the leader of these heretics is killed and is posing as one of the Holy See of Ishgard's Inquisitors, and it's up to us to take him out. Halfway through the encounter he straight up turns into a massive dragon, but we quickly learn that it's a simple illusion. After dispatching the heretical Inquisitor, it's off to liberate the Stone Vigil from the Dravanians, which is where, conveniently, Cid's airship crash-landed during the Calamity. This is one of the first dungeons to really test players, as any gear you'll have been given as quest rewards won't be on par with the enemies here, leading inexperienced groups to struggle if they've not been buying or crafting appropriate level gear. Bit of an odd spike in difficulty if you're not prepared for it. So atop this keep is the Enterprise, resting just behind an enormous sleeping dragon, and guess who's here to wake it up for us? It's our old friend La Habrea. Impressed that we took down both Ifrit and Titan, he wakes the dragon to try and slow us down before we go after Garuda. Guess how well that works out for him. This makes 5 crystals so far, we're nearly there. The only question is how to break through the vortex surrounding Garuda so we can get into her lair. It's actually quite simple. We use the power of a corrupted crystal to change the wind into another element that Garuda can't control to clear a path. Why didn't I think of that? Alright, so this is pretty contrived, and the fact that Cid just happens to know how all this works in spite of his amnesia is a stretch, but let's just roll with it. So we track down this corrupted crystal, and Garuda, here we come.
Enterprise, engage.
Live long and prosper, English localization team. En route to Garuda's vortex, at the helm of the Enterprise, Cid finally regains his memories. Call it a bit too convenient, but this is a lovely little scene where Cid reminisces about his time in Garlemald, his rocky relationship with his father, and how Gaius took him under his wing. Upon realising Gaius' crazed ambition, Cid fled to Eorzea and established the Garlond Ironworks with Biggs and Wedge so that his knowledge and abilities could serve, in his words, a nobler purpose. We smack Garuda around, and while she's raring to go for round 2, we manage to get our 6th and final crystal out of her. This is where Gaius appears out of nowhere to taunt Garuda into attacking again, causing the Ixal's prisoners, a group of Amalja and Kobold, to cry out and summon Ifrit and Titan again. Surrounded by 3 primals ready to tear us apart, Gaius reveals his true plan.
Bear witness to the glory of the Empire!
This is the Ultima weapon, an ancient Allagan machine designed for one thing, the destruction of primals. It easily absorbs all 3 primals in this brutal display of power, making one thing clear: we're not ready for this. Ultima Weapon's always been one of my favourite recurring bosses in Final Fantasy, and even after fighting it dozens if not hundreds of times over the years, it still gets me hyped. And a little nervous. This whole scene where it ragdolls the 3 primals we spent half the game tracking down and killing just shows what a completely different level it's on, which is fitting of it usually being a late game super boss in the older games. Even though it sort of undermines Gaius, who had so much potential that unfortunately went squandered until a much later storyline, I still think it was a great choice for what would eventually become the final boss of the base game. The final stretch involves us gathering our allies for the huge battle ahead. First off, it's back to the Waking Sands, where we find Ida and Y'shtola. The other Scions, with the exception of the 4 captured by Livia, are either confirmed or presumed dead. We learn from Y'shtola that Minfilia, Urianger, Papalymo and Tataru are being held captive in an Imperial stronghold in the region of Mor-Dhona, south of Kurthus. Before we can break them out, it's back to Kurthus to look for Biggs and Wedge, who apparently managed to escape the Garleans. We find Wedge hiding out under a bridge, having run for his life trying to escape. Biggs, however, wasn't so lucky, and we're off to help him out. We get to do a short battle against a unit of Garleans with Ida and Y'shtola backing us up, before meeting up with Cid for a heartfelt reunion with his Ironworks teammates. Mor-Dhona is the first zone where things really look different. Until now, the game's environments have been fairly typical for the fantasy setting. A forest, a desert, a snowy area, and so on. Mor-Dhona is considerably more diverse. There's strange weather patterns in this gloomy purple sky. On one side there's Castrum Sentry, the industrial stronghold and mining facility where our friends are being held, surrounded by marshlands. On the opposite end, there's huge crystal formations stretching out from the area where Dalamud fell, and off in the distance is the ominous Crystal Tower, which we'll be coming back to later. We arrive smack bang in the middle of all that, in a small town called Revenant's Toll. It's here that Cid devises a plan to sneak into Castrum Sentry disguised as Imperial soldiers and rescue everyone. So it's off to do some scouting, as we listen to a conversation through a drainage pipe in the marshland. Next, we not so sneakily killed some soldiers for their uniforms. Finally, we learn the Imperial salute, don our disguise, and lure a patrol away so we can steal their Magitech Reaper. It's pretty banged up after the battle, but after Biggs and Wedge tinker with it, it's as good as new. We're finally ready to save our friends. Wait, we didn't steal any trousers? So despite Biggs and Wedge sticking out like sore thumbs and our painfully obvious lack of trousers, we manage to infiltrate the stronghold without a hitch. We free our allies with surprising ease, but the Garleans aren't about to let us go without a fight. We end up cornered by a group of soldiers at the edge of a cliff. Their commander orders us killed, and just as they're about to take us down...
What the?
The Y'shtola! Pray, forgive us our delay.
Look, don't say I didn't warn you about the voice acting. Y'shtola buys us enough time for Ida to rush in and wipe the firing squad out. Unfortunately, Wedge couldn't handle a few measly soldiers in his high-powered death machine, and in a bout of bewildering stupidity, he ditches it.
You ditched your Magitech armor. Fool of a Lalafell!
Well, excuse me. She's all yours if you think you can do any better.
This scene is a goldmine for unintentionally hilarious dialogue, I swear. Lucky for us, backup's on the way, and we make our dramatic escape by jumping off a cliff onto the Enterprise. Mission successful. However, we're about to be kicked right back down. Laha Breha is among the Imperials, and it's here that he reveals himself to be Thancred. The initial shock of this reveal is fantastic, but it ends up falling a bit flat because in about 5 minutes we find out that Thancred's only really been possessed by Laha Breha. See, Ascians work similar to Primals, in that they don't have a physical form, but instead of prayers and ether granting them bodies, they use crystals of darkness to possess pretty much whoever they like. In order to free Thancred from La Habre's possession, we've got to destroy the crystal he holds, and the Ascian will be forced out of his body. With that in the back of our minds, it's time for the endgame. Gathering the remaining scions and enlisting the support of the Grand Companies, Alphinaud briefs us on Operation Archon, a large-scale offensive against the Garleans. The Grand Companies are sent to assault various Garlean strongholds throughout Eorzea, with our ultimate goal of infiltrating Castrum Meridianum to destroy the Ultima Weapon. Our first port of call is Cape Westwind, and to ambush and kill Rititin. Remember him? Yeah, he gets absolutely zero character development, and as I said earlier, he's basically just there to be a big beefy dude for us to kill. It is what it is. The fight's actually pretty good. The guy puts up a hell of a fight, bombarding us with missiles, getting back up after we thought he was done, and in this last-ditch effort to kill us, he tries to take us down with him. Great encounter overall, but unfortunately he's a completely forgettable character. After finishing him off, we destroy the nearby teleporter, cutting off one of the Garlean strongholds from the mainland. With our duty done, and the Grand Companies reporting success in their assaults on the Empire, we enter Castrum Meridianum. This is a relatively straightforward romp through an Imperial fortress, and has you facing off against foot soldiers, a Magitech Reaper similar to the one we used before in a battle that lasts far too long thanks to an abundance of backup, and finally a souped up Magitech Vanguard. For one of the last dungeons in the game, it's a little on the easy side, but I suppose it's so newer players can get through the story. As an RPG, it's far too low of a difficulty curve, but as an MMO designed for as broad an audience as possible, you can understand the desire to make it accessible. So Castrum's final boss is Livia. She's completely lost the plot at this point, desperately wanting to do anything to keep us away from Gaius. There's a handful of lines suggesting a romantic subplot between her and Gaius, but it never really goes anywhere. She's ruthless, bordering on psychotic, in love with Gaius for some reason, and that's about all there is to say about her. I dig the music for a fight, but again, it's a little on the easy side, with some AoE attacks that have some of the longest telegraphs in the game. If you can't dodge most of these, you must not be paying attention, quite frankly. So after taking her out and dealing with the shield generators protecting the Praetorium, it's time to end it once and for all. So the Praetorium is this sort of fortress within a fortress that houses the Ultima Weapon, and heading through it with Cid backing us up, we quickly confront Gaius, who tries and fails to convince Cid to join him in this weird Darth Vader-esque "it is your destiny" speech. He sends a Magitech Colossus, essentially a giant robot with a massive sword, to slow us down, but we dispatch it with relative ease. The next section has as commandeer a Magitech Reaper, the exact same one we used to rescue our allies earlier with, to tear our way through the rest of the facility. It's a bit of a power trip as we mow down large groups of enemies, but one thing I noticed is when you run a dungeon with the duty support NPCs, they just go on foot for some reason. It doesn't make it unbeatable because the Magitech's so powerful, I just thought it was kind of funny. After overloading the Reaper's systems to break our way into the depths of the Praetorium, we run into Nero. Turns out this guy's got a bit of a jealous streak due to being constantly compared to Cid, who, despite turning his back on Garlemald, was still praised for his genius. Next to Gaius, Nero is the most memorable and developed character out of the 14th Legion, but it's still such a shame that the others really never got much time in the spotlight. Another relatively straightforward encounter here where he activates some Magitech claws to try and push us into unsafe spots, but they're easily taken out. A convenient blackout lets him escape at the end of our battle, but there's no time to go after him. We're mere steps away from the lift leading down to the chamber of the Ultima Weapon.
Tell me, for who do you fight?
Gaius' monologue is a popular one, if a little bit cheesy. It's little more than him trying to justify his actions and that the strong should rule over the weak. Yeah, he's one of those villains. He gets some shiny new armor before fighting us though. It's been a running theme throughout, but Gaius ends up going down relatively easily. What you've got to bear in mind here is these dungeons were reworked from 8-man duties with some quite frankly horrible level scaling to what we have today. Groups used to breeze through, killing everything so fast that even the Ultima Weapon itself went down in less than a minute. What we have now is definitely a major improvement, but with it being the run-up to the big final boss, I think it could have been a bit more challenging, as even complete newbies will find this easier than even some of the earlier dungeons. It's extraordinarily rare that you'll wipe to any of these encounters, and even the big DPS check at the end is extremely forgiving. That said, this isn't really endgame material anymore, as there's 4 whole expansions worth of content ahead. After the fight, the lift finally reaches its destination, and Gaius boards the Ultima Weapon.
Bear witness to the true power of the Ultima Weapon.
This is a gauntlet of all the previous Primal's mechanics, with each one building up an extremely powerful ability before Hydaelyn intervenes to tear the essence of each Primal away from the machine. Perplexed by our ability to withstand the Ultima weapon's ferocity, Gaius begins to question whether it's truly as all-powerful as it's claimed to be. This is where La Habrea appears to reveal its true power, the Heart of Sabik, the artifact powering the core of the weapon, capable of using the most powerful magic of all, Ultima. La Habrea's plan all along was to absorb the power of the Primals to unleash the ultimate magic.
Such devastation! This was not my intention!
Hydaelyn conveniently shields us from the blast, and in the burning remains of the Praetorium, we finally take down the Ultima weapon. It's out of primal power, but it's still got a few tricks up its sleeve. The fight ends with Hydaelyn granting us our first level 3 limit break, which is a really awesome moment to close things out with. I don't think there's anything cooler than watching a black mage drop Meteor on whatever giant boss you're fighting. With the Ultima weapon taken out, there's one thing left to take care of: La Habrea. Like any good villain, La Habrea reveals his plan before our fight. An imbalance of some kind is apparently destroying the planet, and he believes Hydaelyn, the Mother Crystal not the planet, is the problem. He wants to bring back the one true god and initiate something called the Rejoining. What all that means is a mystery for another time. So he straight up kills us. And I'd like to say this is the last time they pull this fake out on us. I really would. So Hydaelyn's somehow capable of resurrection, and we get straight back up. Phase 2 of the battle goes much more smoothly for us, and ends with a callback to our dream from the start of the game, where we use the power of the crystals to conjure a weapon of light and banish La Habrea from Thancred's body. The scene is really dumb, what with all these ghosts of our friends flying into him and overwhelming him with the power of friendship, but I kinda love it in a weird sort of way. We make our heroic escape as the Praetorium comes crashing down all around us. Gaius gets caught in the blast, there's no way he survived that, right? And the day is saved. Credits roll as the United Eorzean Alliance stands tall, declaring the end of the 7th Umbral Era, and closing out their speech declaring,
"The 7th Astral Era is come! And thus is ours a realm reborn!"
And that's the base game of A Realm Reborn finished. Going back through it was a lot of fun. As I said at the top of the video, it's a pretty run-of-the-mill Final Fantasy story, with plenty of odd contrivances and a disappointing lack of any real character development. Maybe it's my nostalgia for the older games talking, but apart from a bit too much downtime and fetch questing, I really enjoyed the story. Of course, that's just the base game, and there's still a fair bit before Heavensward. A few post-credit scenes finally reveal the Ascians' one true god to be called Zodiark, represented by a huge dark crystal to mirror Hydaelyn's light crystal. We also find out that another primal has awakened. Looks like a hero's work is never done. So we've arrived at the part that a lot of players consider the big slog before Heavensward. And while it certainly has some sluggish downtime, this is where we start to see a nice amount of character development, as well as improvements to presentation. As I pointed out way back at the beginning, A Realm Reborn is very simplistic in terms of storytelling. Its plot is basically, this happened, go deal with it. Now this happened, go deal with that. And there's not all that much to be said about most of the characters, as they're initially little more than stereotypes. For example, Minfilia's the motherly leader type, Haurchefant is your loyal ally / biggest fan, and the Ascians and Garleans are very run-of-the-mill, we're evil and want to take over the world villains. It makes discussing the narrative really frustrating, because I'm trying so hard to avoid spoiling later events, but half the characters don't even have their backstories explained, so there's not really that much to say. What makes it worse is the gameplay takes far too long to get interesting. Most jobs don't get their unique abilities till at least level 40 or 50, making combat in the first 20 plus hours a case of target an enemy and press the same 2 or 3 buttons until it's dead. And for an MMO it's very bland, and a large part of why ARR can be such a chore to play through. Now that we're at level 50, most jobs have access to not only stronger abilities, but other skills we can weave between our attacks, as well as gear to shorten our GCD, making combat significantly more enjoyable and leading to some better designed encounters. Alright, with that little ramble out of the way, let's crack on with the patch quests, where we'll be taking our next 3 primals on virtually back to back. In the wake of Gaius and the Ultima weapon's downfall, all the world's eyes are now on the Scions of the Seventh Dawn. What was once a secretive group is now operating in the public eye, and with their HQ being a stone's throw from Ul'dah, it's difficult for them to remain a neutral party, favouring no city-state over the other. With that in mind, Alphinaud suggests moving the Scions' base of operations from the Waking Sands to Revenant's Toll in Mordona. In an attempt to convince Minfilia into agreeing, Alphinaud managed to dig up some information on her presumed dead adoptive mother, Flamene. Turns out she's alive and well, and it's off to fetch her to reunite her with Minfilia. Unfortunately, this questline was cut tremendously short during the big ARR rework. A total of 20 quests were cut from this part of the main scenario, with 9 of them being from patch 2.1 alone. While it dramatically cuts down on what was one hell of a sluggish questline, it makes a few parts feel rushed. We learn she's alive, track her down, and it's straight back to the Waking Sands for our heartfelt reunion, all within the span of about 5 minutes. On top of that, there's a lot of jumping back and forth between the various plot threads, making the whole thing feel disjointed. Now, I'll do my best to stick to one thread at a time to make the video flow a little bit better, but bear in mind that a lot of the patch content involves us going back and forth between the various plot points. So, Alphinaud's little plan worked, and the Scions start packing to head to Mordona, and their new home, the Rising Stones. While preparations are being made, we receive urgent news from Gridania. Another Primal has been summoned. Is Garuda back? Could it be Ramuh? Well, actually it's neither. The Mughals have summoned Good King Moggle Mog XII. Talk about subverting expectations. A friendly Moogle offers to guide us to where the Good King and his royal guard, the Moggle's guard, are hiding. So it's time for everybody's favourite type of quest, an escort mission. This is surprisingly refreshing. The majority of quests across the game involve either talking to NPCs or killing a handful of enemies, with the occasional instance battle or dungeon. So having to escort this Moogle across the Shroud is a nice change of pace. After fighting our way through the forest, we enter the domain of the Good King Moggle Mog XII. This is actually the first time you have to queue up to play with other people. As I mentioned earlier, the duty support lets you play through everything in the main scenario apart from the 8-man trials, meaning this could very well be your first real interaction with other players. So this encounter starts with a gauntlet of Mughals coming at us before the Good King reveals himself, and the real battle begins. There's a ton of silly dialogue and speech bubbles that pop up, with this upbeat musical number in the background that you will be humming to yourself for the next few hours. Great stuff. With the Good King banished and no longer a threat, it's back to the Waking Sands to say our farewells, when Minfilia is suddenly attacked by a white-robed Ascian. This is Elidibus, and if you thought La Habrea was cryptic, have I got news for you. Minfilia quickly recovers and sends us to track him down, where he gives us a message. All shall soon change. As it was, so shall it be again, as it should always have been. It seems he's doing his own thing while the rest of the Ascians go about their plans to bring Zodiark back, as we're treated to a very brief scene in which another Ascian, Nabrialis, questions Elidibus' intentions when it came to revealing himself to us. Either way, they seem pretty convinced that we'll end up agreeing with their plan once we learn to master the power of the Echo. Our next task is to investigate a crystal robbery. Our suspects are initially the Amalja again, but we soon find out that the thieves may have come from Lanosha. At the same time, a group of refugees from the eastern city of Doma arrive at the Waking Sands. We're about to get pulled in a few different directions here. This is what I meant by the story feeling disjointed. Just as we head off to do one thing, another plot thread pops up, and it starts to feel like we're being pulled in all directions. This is where all of that really kicks off. So the leader of this group is Lady Yugiri, a masked shinobi who brings us dire news. First, a war of succession has broken out in Garlemald, with the late Emperor's grandson and his uncle vying for the throne. Yugiri's second piece of news is that Doma has been razed to the ground by the Empire to set an example for the other provinces under Garlean occupation. Her group of refugees are here to meet with the leaders of Uldar to seek asylum. This is where we finally get to see the Syndicate. Up to this point we've only ever seen General Rauban and the Sultana Nanamo. We get to meet the main representatives of the Syndicate here, but only 2 speak in this meeting. First we hear from Teleji Adeleji, who is ready to welcome the Domans with open arms, provided they're able to work to earn their keep. Lord Lolorito, on the other hand, rejects the idea. He thinks Uldar is sheltering too many refugees and claims they're prone to violence. A vote is called and Lolorito, along with the 3 other as yet unnamed Syndicate members, leave, and Yugiri's asylum claim is rejected. Man, I hate politics. After being rejected by the Syndicate, Alphinaud suggests the Domans head to Revenant's Toll, and it's up to us to escort the refugees from their ship docked outside the Waking Sands. I hated this part. It has you playing hide and seek with a bunch of kids who end up pestering you with a bunch of silly questions. It's endearing in the sense that they're basically fanboying over you, but I'd rather not be babysitting, especially when there's so much other important stuff going on. Mercifully, this is another stretch of the game that was gutted in the rework, so at least we don't have to move a bunch of crates around or sniff chocobos. I'm not kidding about that last part, by the way. Remember that investigation into the crystal robbery? Well, it turns out our culprits are the Serpent Reavers, a group of pirates enthralled to the next primal on our chopping block, Leviathan. But there's more than a simple summoning going on. A Sahagin priest claims he's being granted the gift of knowledge and eternity, allowing him to stand as the emissary's equal. It seems that Elidibus is capable of granting the Echo to other beings, which conjures up all sorts of questions about the power's nature. Alongside Ugiri, Thancred, Minfilia, and even Admiral Merlwyb, we fought our way through to the Sahagins' lair to confront the priest. This is a surprisingly well animated scene with some great action shots as Thancred and Ugiri show off their skills. As I said before, the presentation has greatly improved over the course of these quests, and it only gets better as we start to go through the expansions. Despite our best efforts, we're too late to stop the priest from gaining the Echo. Upon being shot and killed by the Admiral, his essence quickly transfers into one of his followers, allowing him to live on. For all intents and purposes, this priest has been given the same form of immortality as the Ascians. The Sahagin then attempt to summon Leviathan, and Merlwyb quickly guns them all down, but the priest's essence remains, only to be immediately absorbed by the successfully summoned Primal. So much for the immortality, I guess. This leads Minfilia to eventually conclude that it might be possible to kill an Ascian permanently by interrupting the transfer of their essence from one body to another. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We've got bigger fish to fry right now. Leviathan is heading out to sea to unleash a tsunami on Lenosha. Taking the advice of Merlwyb's second-in-command, whose name I am deathly afraid to try and pronounce, we come up with a plan to take a barge loaded with corrupted crystals out to sea in order to weaken Leviathan, in a similar manner to how we made it through the Vortex to Garuda before. This is actually the first trial that requires us to do something outside of just wailing on the Primal until it dies. There's an elemental converter in the back of the barge we have to activate to shield us from Leviathan's attacks. This sort of boss design leads to the worst trial in the game when we get to Heavensward, but it's good to see the devs experiment every now and then. Can't wait to get to Stormblood's trials. So we take Leviathan down, and this is where Minfilia realises it might actually be possible to kill an Ascian, as I alluded to before. The only question is how to trap their essence once we kill them. But before we can start working on that, Urianger arrives with even more bad news. The students of Baldesion, a group of scholars allied with the Scions, appear to have been wiped out, as the Isle of Val, the group's home, has completely disappeared thanks to a powerful magic similar to Ultima. You might be wondering why I haven't brought this group up before. Well, that's because they are only ever mentioned in passing until now, and we don't know a thing about them at this point. In fact, the only reason I bring it up now is their disappearance sets up a single plot point later, and we get to meet a pair of important characters associated with them. I can't help but think the group on a whole was meant to play a bigger role in the story here, but it got cut or the overall direction changed during development. After our meeting with Minfilia and Urianger, the game cuts to the end of a syndicate meeting, where Teleji Adeleji receives word from one of his servants.
It is done, my lord. Forgive my impertinence, my lord, but these orders, I am uncertain as to what end they serve.
Revolution.
Tensions are flaring between the citizens of Uldar and the Alamegan refugees, and rioting has broken out in the city, set off by a group of the Brass Blades, a mercenary group hired by the Syndicate to theoretically serve as the city guards, who started firing upon unarmed refugees during a protest. We don't get to experience any of this ourselves, but after being caught up in the carnage himself, Alphinaud informs us that the refugees were surprisingly well armed. Gee, I wonder who helped them out there. Well, it turns out that not only did Teleji arm the refugees, but a merchant employed by him was the one who gave the order to fire on the protesters. This is all because he wants to annex the Carteneau Flats, the site of the Battle of Carteneau, so that the refugees can be settled there. This is where things get complicated. The flats are home to ancient Allagan ruins unearthed during the Calamity. Due to nobody being able to agree on what to do with them, the city-states each have a military presence in the area, but because they're allies, any conflicts that arise within the area are agreed to have no bearing on relations between them. Fun fact, this is one of the PvP maps, meaning we actually get to take part in these conflicts. Interesting way to bake PvP into the lore as this sort of unofficial war between the three nations with no political consequences. So despite the instability in the region, Teleji Adeleji proposed the Carteneau Reclamation Bill, which, if successful, would grant him control over the flats and the ruins, under the guise of assisting the resettlement effort. Now why would he go through all of this, risking the collapse of the Eorzean alliance and committing treason against the Sultanate? The ruins house another Allagan superweapon, Omega. But this is going to have to stick around in the back of our minds for quite some time, as we're heading to Little Solace, where the Sylphs have finally summoned Ramuh. Much like the Mughals before them, the Sylphs summon Ramuh out of a fear of what might happen in the future than any immediate threat to their well-being. For this reason, Ramuh is willing to hear us out as we try to offer peace. He still challenges us to a fight though. It's another relatively straightforward encounter, with our only real issues being having to kill his arbiters, who render him immune to damage, and trying to make his lightning attacks hit any allies stunned by him to shock them out of it. It teaches you that sometimes standing in certain AoEs or dragging one placed over you onto your teammates might be useful, though 90% of the time it's a terrible idea. As a healer main, it drives me up the wall, don't be that guy. After the battle, Ramuh judges as worthy, agrees to stay in his own territory, and both he and the Sylphs no longer pose a threat to the outside world. Heading back to the Rising Stones, the Scions call a meeting to discuss the possibility of killing an Ascian. To recap on how they function, rather than their essence returning to the lifestream upon death like mortals and primals, Ascians' essences enter a space between the material plane and the lifestream before returning. Theorizing that the dark crystal La Habrea used to possess Thancred acted as a gateway into that space, which would explain why the Sahagin priest was so easily absorbed by Leviathan, the group concludes that the solution to killing an Ascian lies in trapping their essence before it has a chance to escape, denying them their resurrection. It's a lot to wrap your head around, but we lack a suitable means of trapping them, so that's yet another problem for another time. On our way out of the meeting, we run into two new members of the Scions, Hoary Boulder and Coulternay. Hoary has the bright idea of wanting to spar with us, so we take him outside and with an audience of Scions and adventurers, we give him a taste of our axe. The people have taken to calling the Warrior of Light the Guardian of Eorzea, one more title for the list, and inspired by our bravery, Alphinaud takes it upon himself to form the Crystal Braves, a new military organisation under the Scions featuring adventurers from all across Eorzea, with the goal of being a neutral group with no ties to any one specific nation to, in his own words, succeed where the nations of Eorzea have failed to solve the problems which plague the realm. This is where Alphinaud really enters his insufferable, arrogant little so-and-so phase, and I genuinely start to resent him as a person here. He's due a harsh reality check, and soon. It's back to Kurthus once more, hot on the trail of a group of heretics attacking supply lines from Haurchefont's people at Camp Dragonhead to Mor Dhona. It seems they have a new leader, a woman by the name of Iceheart, and are holed up in an area called Snowcloak. Before heading there, we meet with Sir Aymeric, Lord Commander of the Temple Knights of Ishgard, and his second-in-command, Lucia. Aymeric is smooth, calm yet authoritative, handsome, and look at those luscious locks. Where was I? Oh, right, the meeting. Despite Alphinaud failing to convince Ishgard to rejoin the Eorzean alliance, Aymeric does offer to protect the supply lines in exchange for the Scions watching over the Keeper of the Lake, the site where the corpse of Midgardsormr lies wrapped around the wreckage of the Garlean flagship, the Agrius. Remember that? Yeah, it just so happens to be a short walk from the Rising Stones, and Ishgard believes the Dreadworm could soon rise from the dead. This all stretches to set up our next pair of dungeons, the first of which is Snowcloak. This will be our first dungeon since the Praetorium, and it's where an awkward new trend rears its ugly head, blocking the path forward until you've killed all of the previous enemies. This might not sound like a big deal, but it artificially lengthens the dungeon by halting your progress between boss fights. It's obviously to prevent players from biting off more than they can chew and making you fight in waves rather than pulling everything in one go, but the way I see it, if a tank can pull every pack and the healer can keep him alive, why not let them do it? I understand wanting to mix things up, but I don't think slowing the pace is the best idea, quite frankly. At any rate, we meet Iceheart, who's nice enough to reveal her birth name, Ysayle, so thanks I guess. She claims to want to bring an end to the war between man and dragon that's been raging for the last millennium. She teleports away using an aetheryte similar to the one we used to reach Titan, and destroys the one it's linked to, cutting off any chance of us following her. So it's back to Gridania for a meeting with the Alliance leaders. The War of Succession in Garlemald has ended, and Varys, grandson of the late Emperor Solus, has defeated his uncle to take the throne. Looks like the Empire might be ready to strike again soon. While we're in Gridania, we meet with Captain Ilberd of the Crystal Braves, who's been on the trail of a Garlean spy within the ranks of the Immortal Flames. This is one of those plot threads that's been going on for a little while, but nothing really comes of it until now. The spy turns out to be Ilyn Hoyle, Raubarn's second-in-command. Chasing her back to Castra Meridianum, we battle an Imperial unit and bring her in for questioning. This proves hugely discouraging for Raubarn, who we later learn is under surveillance by Teleji Adelegi, who himself is stirring up more trouble and has plans to go after Nanamo. Back in Mor Dhona, we meet Moonbreeder, a Sharlayan scholar and longtime friend of Urianger, who has been helping to research a means of capturing Ascian souls. A woman of many talents, Moonbreeder is able to help us get to Iceheart by using something called White Auracite. Now, it's not quite explained exactly what Auracite is at this point, but we do know that it's capable of storing vast quantities of ether for a short period. This is the same substance Moonbreeder seems to think is capable of capturing an Ascian, but due to it only being able to hold ether for a short amount of time, we'll need something more if we're to finish them off for good. Utilising the White Auracite, Moonbreeder is able to help us navigate the Lifestream to track down Iceheart, who is attempting to summon Saint Shiva, an Elezen woman who lived thousands of years ago and was said to have fallen in love with the great dragon Hraesvelgr. If you're a fan of the series, you know what's coming next. As opposed to using crystals and prayer, Iceheart offers her own body for Shiva to inhabit and successfully calls her forth. A great trial here, with lots of movement going on and that moment where she casts her signature Diamond Dust, along with one of the best songs in the game backing it up. Easily my favourite primal so far, and probably one of my favourite recurring bosses in all of Final Fantasy. After we banish Shiva from Iceheart's body, she tells us to seek the Keeper of the Lake, and echoing Hydaelyn's words, hear, feel, think, she departs. Alright, let's take a break from the main scenario for a bit and talk about ARR's raids, starting with the Coils of Bahamut. The Coils of Bahamut are the first series of 8-man raids in Final Fantasy XIV, and because this is before the devs settled into a formula for raids, they're of considerably higher difficulty than any of the previous content, and are chock full of cutscenes. As such, they don't show up in the raid roulette, and people don't queue for them anymore, opting instead to run them unsynced at max level, which is what I'll be doing here. Doing it this way makes the fights laughably easy, so I'll mostly be focusing on the story here. So we finally get to see Alisaie again, who asks for our help investigating the shards of Dalamud that fell during the Calamity because they've been exhibiting strange etheric readings, suggesting primal activity. Our first shard is just beyond a Garlean stronghold, and upon breaking our way through, it's straight underground to discover the secrets of the Calamity. As far as the people of Eorzea are concerned, Bahamut simply disappeared on the night of the Calamity, rather than continuing on his path of destruction. But after taking down some of Dalamud's still active defensive drones, we discover Bahamut's wings preserved in the crystal structure, begging the question of whether Louisoix actually defeated him, and if so, how he managed to retain physical form for such a long time. Remember, primals are meant to return back to the Lifestream after death, and Bahamut clearly hasn't. Fighting our way through the ruins, we discover the shocking truth. Bahamut's head is still down here, and Dalamud's systems are still active, regenerating the Elder Primal. That primal we heard cry out at the end of the base game, it was Bahamut all along. But that's not all. We catch a glimpse of Louisoix himself, alongside another figure. How could the Archon have survived this long? We turn off one of the coils powering Bahamut's regeneration and leave this shard for now. Our second foray into one of the shards of Dalamud delivers another shocking twist. The second figure we saw was none other than the White Raven, Nael van Darnus, Legatus of the 7th Legion of the Garlean Empire, and the madman behind the Meteor Project, the grand plan to bring down the ancient Allagan satellite to wreak havoc on Eorzea. Now enthralled to Bahamut and referred to as Nael Deus Darnus, he speaks of Bahamut's beloved children, before heading deeper inside. Giving chase, we find an area with a false sky and a copy of Dalamud looming above. In yet another bizarre twist, Nael is revealed to actually be a woman, transforms into this half-dragon creature, and we take her down. Okay, so one thing that's not actually mentioned here is that the real Nael died years before the Calamity, and this is his sister, Eula van Darnus, who assumed Nael's identity after his passing. It's a complete and utter convoluted mess of a plot, and it's about to get even messier. So with Nael defeated, she breaks free from Bahamut's influence, essentially reversing the effects of tempering. Nael is then immediately killed by what we can assume to be Louisoix, and we're off to shut down another of these regenerating coils, only to learn that Louisoix is not only alive and well, but enthralled to Bahamut. And if you think this story's insane already, the best is yet to come. Worried for his sister, Alphinaud joins us for the third and final shard, where we learn how the Allagans sustained Bahamut for all this time. Dozens, if not hundreds of dragons are being imprisoned here, his beloved children constantly praying for his help, keeping the Elder Primal trapped inside Dalamud. Ancient Allag's cruelty knew no bounds. Attempting to disable the final coil, allowing Bahamut to die once and for all, we're confronted by the enthralled Louisoix, and the truth is revealed. In Louisoix's desperate attempt to stop Bahamut during the Calamity, he became the Primal Phoenix. And after defeating Phoenix in battle, we break Louisoix free from Bahamut's control, and learn the truth about the Calamity in what is quite frankly one of the most ridiculously anime cutscenes I've ever watched. I mean, look at this. He straight up flies through Dalamud and Bahamut. So it turns out the prayers of everyone fighting below infused him with the power of the Phoenix, allowing him to shatter Bahamut's corporeal form, causing a shower of ether to rain upon the land. Thinking his job was done, Louisoix gave up this power, but Bahamut managed to wrest control of the Phoenix's energy and enthrall the Archon. What a completely insane series of events. As much as it's an important part of the lore and it's recommended to at least experience the story during your adventure, it's just so out there. Even for Final Fantasy, this is pretty ridiculous. But of course, we're not done yet. Approaching the controls for the final coil, the half-regenerated Bahamut attacks. With the twins shielding us from it, we're able to enter the crystalline heart of the dragon to put a stop to him once and for all. This is really just the game's excuse to give us a proper fight with Bahamut, and despite it being easy playing unsynced, there's a great reprise of the CGI trailer's music, along with some quite frankly amazing imagery. Check out Bahamut here as he charges up his signature move Terror Flare. This looks fantastic, even if it barely scratches me at level 90. So with the dragon defeated and the final coil shut down, Bahamut finally dissolves into the ether and the day is saved, with no one in Eorzea the wiser. See, if the truth were to come out, people would pray to Phoenix for help, but knowing that this would cause no end of trouble, it's agreed that we can never speak of these events to anyone. Bit of a cop-out ending, but it is what it is. So our next set of raids is the Crystal Tower series, the game's first Alliance raids. Anyone who runs the Alliance roulettes is intimately familiar with this group of raids, as they're the only mandatory Alliance raids in the game, and therefore the only one that everyone unlocks. It's a real shame because the other Alliance raids are all great fun, especially the Stormblood and Shadowbringers ones, but not enough people bother to unlock them, meaning we don't get to see them in the roulettes anywhere near as often as the Crystal Tower series. But I digress. The Crystal Tower storyline should be familiar to anybody who's played Final Fantasy III, as it's a recreation of the last 3 dungeons in that game, the Ancient's Maze, Crystal Tower, and the World of Darkness. Seeing these classic NES dungeons brought to life with such loving detail, from the music to the bosses' movesets and everything in between, is a testament to the developers' love and respect for the Final Fantasy franchise on a whole, and the references and callbacks only get better as we go. So our story begins in Mordona, where we meet a masked man who points us in the direction of a research group called the Sons of St. Koinak, who, alongside our good friend Cid, are looking into the reappearance of the ancient Allagan Crystal Tower, which had been unearthed during the Calamity. Entrance to the tower is impossible due to an extensive system of barriers blocking the way and blasting airships out of the sky. Our first objective is to find a way to disable the barriers. Each one represents an element: earth, wind, fire, water, and the leader of the Sons, a man named Rambros, theorises that we need to gather crystals of each element to... Wait a minute, why do I have this strange sense of déjà vu? So it's off to visit each of Eorzea's beast tribes to borrow their crystals, and for some reason we're only allowed to gather 2 before reporting back to Rambros, who immediately sends us away to pick up 2 more. We gather these earth, water, fire and wind crystals and report back to Mordona. But because things are never that simple, it turns out we need to cut and polish the crystals using rare varieties of ether sand. So it's off to the Goldsmiths Guild in Uldar, where they provide us with some fire-aspected sand. And guess who also happens to want the aether sand? Why, it's Biggs, of course. How convenient. He agrees to give up his claim to the sand as long as he can join our investigation. We then rescue Wedge from some bandits to get our earth-aspected sand, and it's back to Rambros again, only to, guess what, be sent right back off to get the other 2 varieties of sand. We head to the Black Shroud, where our search is interrupted by a disembodied voice. First taunting us, then challenging us to a race to the location of our next batch of sand, our stalker quickly turns into an admirer, and is nice enough to give us our 4th and final bag of sand. Back to Rambros we go. This is where we meet our stalker turned admirer, and someone who would eventually become a fan favourite character, G'raha Tir. Here he's a cocky little so-and-so. He wants to take charge and acts like a spoiled brat when he doesn't get his way. So anyway, we use the crystals, which Cid has shaped into fangs for some reason that's never really explained, to break through the ancient barriers protecting the tower, and it's finally time for our first Alliance raid, the Labyrinth of the Ancients. As I said a few minutes ago, this is a relatively faithful recreation of the Ancient's Maze from Final Fantasy III, and the monsters from the NES original are all here. The Bone Dragon, Thanatos, and King Behemoth all serve as the raid's bosses, with Final Fantasy III's version of Titan renamed Phlegathon as the final boss. No Earth Crystal for us here though. Sorry Devout and Magus fans, but at least we can still get their outfits, right? After fighting our way through the labyrinth, we arrive at the foot of the Crystal Tower, and G'raha offers us some tidbits on the Allagans. The Guardians of the Tower are resurrected versions of ancient Allag's champions, with Phlegathon being a hero of the Allagan Revolution. The tower itself, as I briefly alluded to at the top of the video, was created to harness the power of the sun, and beamed it down via Dalamud. It didn't work out so well for them in the end, but we'll get back to that in a bit. Regrouping back at camp, our party decides the best course of action regarding the tower is to seal it off again, if possible. That means heading up there to see how everything works. The only problem facing them is how to enter the tower itself. It's here we learn the identity of the man who sent us on this journey, Nero. He claims whatever's at the top of the tower to be as powerful as the Ultima weapon itself, and has his sights set on it. A pair of scholars approach our camp, who should be immediately familiar to FF3 fans, Une and Doga. Claiming to be sent by the students of Baldesion, who were all missing and presumed dead at this point if you remember, they point out that G'raha's red eye is the same as theirs, and that all who share the red Allagan eye are bound to the ancient empire by fate. And bound by fate, our new friends most definitely are. When we head to the enormous door barring our entrance, Une and Doga's true nature is revealed. They share the blood of the royal family of the Allagan Empire. Not only that, but Nero turns up to reveal they're actually a pair of clones. Okay, so this is a weird Final Fantasy III thing. The last couple of dungeons featured a bunch of palette swaps of previous bosses as regular enemies, and as far as I'm aware there was never really any explanation for it lore-wise. I guess this is 14 trying to fit the clones into its lore and flesh things out, and flesh things out they actually do. Une and Doga explain everything to us. The Crystal Tower was created to harness the power of the sun, which was being siphoned by Dalamud. Over the years, the Allagan Empire had become a shadow of its former self, and one man, a technologist by the name of Amon, made it his mission to resurrect the founding father of the Empire, Xande. In the newly resurrected Emperor's lust for power, Xande turned the Crystal Tower into a research facility, whose purpose was to harness the powers of darkness. Unfortunately for him, the tower wasn't capable of containing so much energy, leading it to collapse, triggering a series of earthquakes and wiping out the Allagan Empire. For the people inside the tower, including Xande, time completely stopped. That was until Dalamud was brought back down during the calamity. When the tower resurfaced, everyone inside it woke back up, and now Xande sits atop the tower. Our two clone friends here had been searching for people to help take him down once and for all. So it's up the tower we go. Much like the last raid, this one brings back a bunch of FF3 enemies for its bosses, including a few from the optional dungeon Eureka. First up is Scylla, followed by Glacia Labolas, then the previously mentioned technologist Amon, and finally Emperor Xande. And in typical Final Fantasy III fashion, killing Xande isn't the end. When Xande tried to harness the power of darkness, he entered a covenant with a being from the void, the Cloud of Darkness. This caused a rift to open atop the Crystal Tower. While attempting to close it, Une and Doga are attacked by a group of clones and sucked into the rift. Nero, in all his stupidity and lust for power, gives chase, as the Cloud of Darkness claims that Xande's covenant shall be honoured, and our world should be engulfed in darkness. And now we enter our third and final raid of this series, World of Darkness. At the risk of sounding like a broken record, this is another excellent recreation with some great homages to Final Fantasy III. I love how they even added the Xande clone in a treasure chest, which is a brilliant reference. Anyone who hasn't played FF3 will be completely lost, I'm sure, but as a fan, this is some outstanding attention to detail. So we make our way through, killing off classic enemies such as an Ahriman, renamed Angra Mainyu after the real-life archaic Iranian name for the evil spirit the creature is loosely based on, as well as the five-headed dragon and Cerberus, before a showdown with the Cloud of Darkness herself, who still hasn't learned any moves other than Particle Beam since Final Fantasy III. Driving back the Cloud of Darkness, we meet up with Une, Doga, and a very corrupted Nero. Xande's covenant was to ensure the prosperity of Allagan royalty, so our clone friends here are protected from the darkness's corruption. Nero, not so much. It's here we finally learn the truth about G'raha Tir and his eye. He is a true descendant of Allagan royalty and is able to control the Crystal Tower. Une and Doga used their blood to bolster the Allagan presence within him before staying behind to fight off the Cloud of Darkness, break the Covenant, and secure our escape. In what is quite frankly an incredibly cheesy scene, the corruption breaks away from Nero, allowing him to join us in escaping the void completely unharmed. With a little help from Cid. The rift is sealed, and all that's left is to seal the tower away from the outside world. Wishing for it to one day serve as a beacon of hope for mankind, but knowing that our current civilization doesn't have the technology capable of correctly using the tower, G'raha decides the best course of action is to do as the Allagans once did, and halt the flow of time within the tower, with him inside. Hoping to one day awaken to a brighter future once the people of Eorzea are capable of utilising the tower for the good of the realm, G'raha Tir bids us farewell, sealing the doors to the tower, and our story ends. At least for now. This was one hell of a nostalgia trip with some of the best fan service I've seen, and even though part of me is sick of seeing these raids in the roulettes so often, I still loved every minute of going back through the story here. It's going to be a long time until we revisit the tower, but when we do, it's more than worth the wait. Alright, with the raids all wrapped up, let's carry on with the MSQ. Before we head into our final dungeon, we meet with Riol, a former member of the Company of Heroes and now one of the Crystal Braves, who has suspicions of there being a traitor in the ranks. It seems that whoever was supplying the Alamegan refugees with arms is a member of the Braves. Investigating a lead on a shipment of black market weapons with Captain Ilberd, we corner a merchant who ends up killed by one of Ilberd's subordinates when he drew a concealed weapon. Sloppy work there, Captain. Reporting back to Riol, he lets us know that he'll be looking into where the money for these weapons came from to see if we can find our culprit, before we receive an urgent call to head back to the Rising Stones. Ishgard's astrologians have reason to believe that Midgardsormr has awakened, so we're off to the Keeper of the Lake to investigate. This is the last dungeon of A Realm Reborn's patch cycle. It's an interesting climb through the decks of the Garlean flagship, with Midgardsormr's remains serving as paths around the outside. The Empire was nice enough to send a bunch of soldiers and Magitech our way to slow us down, but after eventually making it to the top, we do in fact meet with the Dreadworm Midgardsormr. As a dungeon, it's pretty solid. The mix of machinery and the scaly body of the dragon along with the gloomy sky make for a great backdrop for smashing Imperials. And the bosses aren't too bad either. There's a lot of movement and positioning yourself to not be caught in explosions, and the last stretch with an Imperial gunship bombing us while we take out some Dravanians looks great. As we reach Midgardsormr's head, the Dreadworm speaks to us, challenging us to a battle with his ghostly shade. Our victory comes at a cost, however. Midgardsormr strips us of the blessing of light and binds him to us, as he claims that one of his children has cried out for retribution, and that Ishgard shall burn. The Dravanians are on the move, but at least we get a little baby Midgardsormr to follow us around. Isn't it cute? Back at the Rising Stones, Moonbreeder's made some progress and asks us to help her test an etheric siphon, a device which should, in theory, be able to tap into the ether stored in the giant crystal formations dotted around the land and transfer it over large distances, allowing us to capture and kill an Ascian permanently. Offering to help her test it out, we run into the Ascian Nabrialis.
Oh, bugger.
He learns that we no longer possess Hydaelyn's blessing, and claims that now is the time to claim the staff. What staff, you ask? Well, Minfilia's been holding on to the broken pieces of Tupsamati, the staff of the Archon Louisoix, and Nabrialis is after the stone tablet attached to it in order to bring about the next rejoining. It's here we also learn that Nabrialis was the one responsible for wiping the Isle of Val off the map. In an attempt to stop him, Moonbreeder is mortally wounded by the Ascian, who captures Minfilia and escapes into a rift. Giving chase, it's time for our final trial. Before I went back through the story, I completely forgot this existed. It's not a bad fight or anything, I just don't think I've ever done it more than the one time for the story. It's also the only trial in the game that doesn't have an extreme version, so there's literally no reason to revisit it. It's a huge spike in complexity at this point, with tank swaps, strong debuffs including a phase that multiplies their duration by 10, a phase where you're sucked into another room and tanks have to run around getting hit by meteors while everyone else attacks an ethereal tear to get back out. It's a lot going from just a handful of AoEs to this, and you don't see anything this complex in the main scenario until maybe the end of Heavensward? I'm not complaining, it's just weird that such a forgettable trial has so much going for it. So we take him down, and combining the white auracite with Louisoix's staff, we try to kill Nabrialis once and for all. But it's not quite enough. Realising he's about to break free, the wounded Moonbreeder sacrifices herself to give us just enough ether to rid us of the Ascian for good. Man, she was such a fun and likeable character, and deserves so much more screen time. This death hits so much harder than you expect it to. With little time to pay our respects, Ishgard calls for aid as we see Iceheart breaking one of the magical wards protecting the city. It's here that Aymeric introduces us to Estinian, the Azure Dragoon. Now if you've leveled Dragoon and played through his job quests, you'll recognise him as the man you were tasked with tracking down after he stole the Eye of the Dragon, Nidhogg, from Ishgard's vault in an attempt to draw the dragon's attention away from the city. We'll learn a lot more about the eyes during Heavensward, but to quickly summarise, they contain a huge amount of the dragon's power, which can be used by whoever holds them, provided they don't succumb to the dragon's influence. While training as a Dragoon, we're tasked with hunting Estinian down as I mentioned, but we later join forces with him to slay Nidhogg, only for the Eye to show Estinian a vision of his mentor being overwhelmed by Nidhogg's rage, giving up the power of the Azure Dragoon, and allowing the dragons to raze Estinian's childhood home to the ground. The vision sent Estinian into a rage, causing him to challenge his former mentor. We fight Estinian in his stead, and upon defeat, Estinian is consumed by Nidhogg's wrath. We're able to free him from it, but when the dust had settled, Estinian fled. That's the last we see of him until here. With the Eye now safely back in the vault, Nidhogg and the Dravanians, along with Iceheart's heretics, are attempting to breach the city to claim it. alongside Estinian, the Scions, and Ishgard's Temple Knights, we're sent to repel the attack. This leads to one of the best solo duties yet, where we're desperately trying to fend off this massive dragon and its minions as it slowly breaks through the wards along the bridge to Ishgard. It's a hell of a fight and it feels so awesome fighting alongside everyone as we struggle to counter the Dravanian offensive. So we barely scrape by, successfully defending Ishgard, for now. To celebrate our victory, we receive an invitation from Uldar to a banquet, not only in honour of Ishgard, but as an attempt to sway them into finally rejoining the Eorzean alliance. Before we head there, we're tasked with filling in for an injured adventurer to assist some scholars in gathering some etheric readings from around Eorzea. It's here we find the body of Wilrid, a young member of the Crystal Braves. It's plain to see he was murdered, and likely by one of the Braves. Upon delivering the news to Riol, he informs us that some of the Braves are on Teleji Adeleji's payroll. Things are about to come to a head. Arriving in Uldar, we're sent off to meet another member of the Braves, Aliarn. Waiting at the meeting spot, she doesn't show, but we catch a glimpse of an empty vial on the ground. Bewilderingly, our character decides the best idea is to pocket it, playing right into the traitor's obvious trap, before heading to a private meeting with the Sultana during the banquet. This is where we get our first glimpse of the now infamous warning. Several cutscenes will play in sequence. We're about to sit through 45 minutes of cutscenes. Hideo Kojima would be proud. Meeting with Nanamo, she reveals to us her plans to dissolve the monarchy, with her intent being for Uldar to become a republic. She asks us to be a guiding hand to Raubarn, and upon expressing her gratitude, the poison almost instantly kills the Sultana. And guess who just so happens to have an empty poison vial? Framed for regicide, the Scions are arrested. Alphinaud is betrayed by his own men. Thancred is surrounded by the brass blades, and our accuser is none other than Teleji Adeleji. Arrogant little prick that he is, he taunts us and mocks the late Sultana right in front of Raubarn, who snaps and immediately cuts Teleji down, before turning his eyes to Lolorito. I guess they drew the line at blood spewing everywhere, huh? In one last twisted reveal, we learn that it was Ilberd who poisoned Nanamo. Losing his arm doesn't stop Raubarn from trying to tear the traitor apart and buy us time to escape, however. On the run, our friends stay behind to buy us time as we head through some convenient underground tunnels to flee Uldar. Ida and Papalymo are first, demolishing a group of Braves and Blades. When do we get that skill as a monk? Thancred and Y'shtola are next, as Y'shtola brings the tunnel down on another group, with the two being engulfed by a blinding light. Finally, Minfilia runs away. Because Hydaelyn told her to? They really wanted us to be on our own down here, didn't they? So we make it back to the surface, and Alphinaud arrives with Pippin Tarupin, Raubarn's adopted son and Vice Marshal of the Immortal Flames, who had just arrived from the Alamegan front. Bit of a weird time to pull a new character out of nowhere, but whatever. He's off to restore order to the city, so I guess this is the game's excuse to let you go wherever you like, despite you technically being on the run. So that's a brief summary of the last 3/4 of an hour. This, to me, is a defining moment of Final Fantasy XIV. All this time we've been enduring these slow build-ups, and the payoff here is unbelievable. If this doesn't get you hooked, I don't know what will. We're on the run, falsely accused of regicide and desperate to find answers and clear our names. Raubarn lost his arm and is locked up. Alphinaud is crushed after suffering a major betrayal, our friends could all be dead, and just as Ishgard was ready to rejoin the Eorzean alliance, everything's gone to hell. Man, what an absolute emotional roller coaster. With nowhere else left to turn, we arrive in Kurthus with Alphinaud to seek the aid of our good friend, Lord Haurchefant. Naturally, he's there to lift us up when we're at our lowest point, and he's more than happy to shelter us for as long as we need. Tataru made it out alive and greets us here, along with an unmasked Yugiri. I guess that's a better way of saving the big new playable race reveal than, I don't know, only showing her legs? Anyway, they inform us that Urianger is alive and well, so not all is completely lost. Alphinaud, on the other hand, has finally been knocked down a notch and realises how much of an arrogant prick he's been. Haurchefant, the absolute legend that he is, manages to lift Alphinaud's spirits as Tataru suggests we take refuge in Ishgard, and the credits roll. Some post-credits scenes reveal that Nanamo's lady-in-waiting was working under Lolorito, a one-armed Rauban is rotting away in prison, and that Urianger has been summoned by Elidibus. Could he be working with the Ascians? That's a question for another time. So that's Final Fantasy XIV: A Realm Reborn. It's a bit of a rough start with some awkward pacing, dodgy voice acting and a handful of odd contrivances here and there, but at the end of the day, it's a classic Final Fantasy story. As I said after the base game, I've got an odd sort of nostalgia for this, so maybe it makes me a bit more forgiving than other players, but I can still see where a lot of the faults lie. The process of leveling to 50, while relatively quick, can feel like a chore, and by the time you're in the patch quests, there's a feeling of wanting to move on that never really goes away. The idea of making ARR skippable has always been a hot topic, but I'm leaning towards recommending you don't skip it, because it does do a lot of important world building. But anyway, despite its obvious faults, I honestly really enjoyed revisiting the story, and it's onwards and upwards from here on out, as we're finally ready to get to where, for a lot of people, Final Fantasy XIV's story truly becomes one of the best in the franchise. Thank you for watching. This has been a hell of a journey so far, and to be honest, a fair bit of a learning experience for me. I'm still trying to get the hang of writing, recording and editing videos, so apologies if things are a little rough. Either way, I'd love to know your thoughts on A Realm Reborn in the comments below, and consider dropping a like and subscribing to the channel so you can catch the rest of this retrospective series. Next week we'll be heading to Ishgard and beyond as we take a look back at Final Fantasy XIV: Heavensward. Take care, and I hope to see you in the next one.